The metal spoon shook violently in Wilhelm Hoffman's grip. His knuckles had turned white from the strain. Before him sat a meal that defied everything he knew about wartime reality. June 4, 1943, at Camp Hearn, Texas, had brought this moment of impossible abundance. Chunks of real beef floated in rich brown stew. The meat pieces were larger than his entire weekly ration back in the African desert. Steam rose from the bowl, carrying smells he had almost forgotten. Fresh vegetables sat alongside the meat, carrots that weren't rotted black, potatoes that hadn't sprouted green shoots. White bread lay beside the stew. Not the sawdust mixture they called bread in Germany. This was actual wheat bread, soft and pale as clouds. The crust was golden brown and still warm from the oven. A glass of milk caught the afternoon sunlight. Cold condensation beaded on the outside. The liquid inside was pure white, not the gray powder mixed with water that German children received when lucky. This was fresh milk from actual cows. Hoffman stared at the feast spread before him. His mind struggled to process what his eyes reported. "This cannot be real," he would later write to his mother in bombed-out Hamburg. The letter would take 6 months to reach her through the chaos of war. "They are showing us propaganda food," he continued in that letter. His handwriting was shaky from malnutrition. "Tomorrow, we will get turnip water like everyone else," he predicted. He was wrong about that prediction. Around Hoffman sat 1850 other German prisoners. All had been captured from Rommel's defeated Afrika Korps. Every man wore the same expression of stunned disbelief. Their hollow cheeks and sunken eyes told stories of prolonged starvation. The mess hall buzzed with nervous energy. American construction crews had built this facility in just 90 days. The speed of construction had impressed the German engineers among the prisoners. Such efficiency seemed impossible, given what they knew about American capabilities. These men had survived on starvation rations for months. 200 grams of sawdust-filled bread daily. Watery soup made from fodder beets when available. The portions before them now could have fed an entire Wehrmacht squad for 3 full days. The clatter of metal utensils had ceased completely. Silence filled the enormous dining hall. Some prisoners wept openly at the sight of real food. Others sat frozen in their chairs. Their minds could not reconcile this abundance with 3 years of Nazi propaganda about America's collapse. Men who had believed in American weakness now faced undeniable proof of American strength. The nation they had been told was starving and divided was feeding enemy prisoners better than Germany fed its own citizens. This revelation would shake their worldview to its foundation. What these soldiers could not comprehend was the true scale of American agricultural might. The United States produced more food than its population could consume, even while feeding 12 million men in uniform, even while shipping 17 million tons of food aid to allies worldwide. The transformation beginning with this first meal would ultimately destroy every assumption these men held. Their beliefs about American weakness would crumble. Their faith in German superiority would collapse. Their confidence in the Third Reich's inevitable triumph would evaporate. To understand the psychological earthquake this meal represented, one must first grasp the depths of deprivation these soldiers had endured. By 1943, Germany's ration system had created a complex hierarchy of hunger that affected every citizen. German civilians were promised 1,700 calories daily. Most received far less than that promise. The ration cards often went unfilled as supplies ran short. Black market prices soared beyond the reach of ordinary families. German soldiers in the field were officially allocated 3,600 calories per day. This remained a paper promise in most cases. Supply lines stretched thin across Europe and Africa. Transport ships fell victim to Allied submarines and aircraft. In North Africa, where most of these first prisoners had been captured, the situation had become truly desperate. The Afrika Korps had been reduced to eating their own horses. Desert conditions spoiled what little food reached them. Feldwebel Werner Müller had served with the 21st Panzer Division in Tunisia. His diary survived the war in his family's possession. His final entry before capture painted a grim picture of German military rations. May 11, 1943, he had written in cramped handwriting, "Division meal today consisted of 150 grams of black bread. The bread was mostly sawdust with flecks of real grain. 15 grams of margarine accompanied the bread. The fat was rancid and tasted of motor oil. Soup was made from one potato and desert weeds. The cooks had foraged whatever plants they could find. The Italians have nothing left to eat," he continued. "We are eating our horses now." The proud cavalry mounts had become emergency rations. The Afrika Korps had once represented the elite of the Wehrmacht. These were the soldiers who had conquered France in 6 weeks. They had driven the British back to El Alameин's gates. Now they had been reduced to walking skeletons by malnutrition and disease. Rommel himself had sent increasingly desperate reports to Berlin. His requests for supplies went largely unanswered. The Desert Fox watched his elite troops waste away from starvation. Ships carrying food supplies were sunk before reaching North African ports. What little food arrived was often spoiled by the desert heat. Storage facilities were primitive or non-existent. Insects and rodents consumed much of what survived the journey. By early 1943, German soldiers in North Africa suffered from diseases of starvation. Scurvy ravaged the troops from lack of vitamin C. Beriberi caused nerve damage from vitamin B1 deficiency. Protein deficiency diseases unknown since the Great War appeared in Wehrmacht medical reports. German field hospitals had no treatment for these conditions. Oberleutnant Friedrich Bauer served as a medical officer before his capture at Kasserine Pass. His documentation of the Afrika Korps' deterioration survived in military archives. The medical situation had become catastrophic by early 1943. The men's gums bled constantly from advanced scurvy, he wrote, in clinical detail. Night blindness affected 30% of all troops due to vitamin A deficiency. Edema from protein starvation caused their legs and feet to swell painfully. We had become an army of walking skeletons, he concluded. Medical supplies were virtually non-existent. Medications had run out months earlier. Even basic wound dressings were in critically short supply. The final surrender in Tunisia came on May 13, 1943. A total of 27,500 Axis soldiers fell into Allied captivity. Among them were veterans of the Wehrmacht's greatest victories, men who had believed absolutely in German racial superiority and American decadence. These soldiers had conquered most of Europe. They had driven deep into the Soviet Union. They had dominated the Mediterranean. Now they were prisoners dependent on American mercy for their next meal. The first shock came immediately at temporary collection points in North Africa. American quartermasters distributed C rations and K rations to the prisoners without ceremony. These combat rations represented standard field meals for American forces. American soldiers complained constantly about these rations. They found them boring and repetitive. To German prisoners, they seemed like miraculous bounty. The small cardboard boxes contained more food than they had seen in months. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt had served with the 90th Light Division. His unit had been decimated by starvation before capture. The American rations seemed impossible to him. The small boxes they called K rations contained a feast, he wrote later. Inside was more food than I had seen in 2 months of fighting. crackers that weren't moldy or filled with weevils, a tin of meat that was actually recognizable as meat, chocolate that melted on the tongue like a memory of peacetime, sugar packets for coffee or tea. Even cigarettes were included. They apologized that this was all they had available, he wrote with wonder. Apologized. American soldiers treated these survival rations as barely adequate nutrition. The journey to America aboard Liberty ships provided the second major revelation about American capabilities. These vessels were rolling off American shipyards at a rate German naval intelligence had declared impossible. The ships were returning empty from supply runs to Europe. Rather than waste the cargo space, the Americans loaded them with human cargo. Prison ships hastily converted Liberty ship holds to transport German POWs across the Atlantic. The modifications were basic, but functional. In these converted holds, German soldiers encountered American abundance in its most casual, everyday form. They watched American sailors dispose of food with careless indifference. The waste shocked them more than the abundance. Gefreiter Hans Weber recorded his observations during the Atlantic crossing. The American sailors threw away more food after each meal than my entire company had eaten in a week. Whole loaves of white bread went into garbage bins after sailors had eaten only a few slices. The sailors complained constantly about having chicken too often. They wanted beef or pork for variety. One sailor crushed a chocolate bar under his boot because it had melted slightly in his pocket. The casual destruction of food seemed almost criminal to starving Germans. We fought each other to dig through their garbage, Weber wrote with shame. Grown men and professional soldiers reduced to scavenging like animals. The abundance that Americans treated as normal seemed miraculous to them. Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia provided the third shock in August 1943. As the prisoner ships docked, German POWs encountered scenes that shattered their preconceptions about wartime America. This was supposed to be a nation on the verge of collapse. Dock workers unloaded ships with mechanical efficiency. Many were women performing jobs that Nazi ideology claimed they could never handle. African American workers operated complex machinery that German propaganda had declared impossible for inferior races. These workers ate thick sandwiches while they labored. Meat and cheese filled the bread to overflowing. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and discarded the containers without thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously and stamped them out half-finished. The processing station administered medical examinations to every arriving prisoner. American doctors discovered malnutrition cases that resembled concentration camp victims more than enemy soldiers. The medical response included something unimaginable to German minds. Vitamin supplements were distributed to address nutritional deficiencies. These pills contained concentrated nutrition that Germany could not produce for its own population. American medical officers worked alongside captured German doctors to treat starvation diseases. Major William Patterson served as U.S. Army medical officer at Norfolk. His reports documented the shocking condition of arriving German prisoners. The Germans arrived in severe states of malnutrition, he wrote. Average weight was 30 pounds below normal ranges. Scurvy, pellagra, and beriberi were common. These were diseases of starvation that medical textbooks described, but doctors rarely saw in practice. We immediately implemented graduated feeding programs to prevent refeeding syndrome from occurring. The train journey into America's interior provided a 3-day education in American agricultural abundance. Prisoner trains rolled through Virginia's Shenandoah Valley in late summer. German soldiers pressed their faces against windows, watching endless orchards heavy with ripening fruit. Fields of corn stretched beyond the horizon. The stalks grew taller and thicker than anything in Germany. Dairy farms displayed herds of fat cattle grazing in green pastures. The animals were larger and healthier than German livestock before the war. Every small town featured grocery stores with windows full of displayed food. Restaurants advertised daily specials on handwritten signs. Ice cream parlors had lines of customers waiting in the summer heat. Children ate ice cream cones while playing in town squares. The American POW camp system would eventually house 42,500 German prisoners at its peak in May 1945. A total of 3,716,83 were present when Germany surrendered. These prisoners were distributed across 700 camps in 46 different states. Texas alone hosted approximately 5,000 German POWs in multiple facilities scattered across the state. The climate resembled North Africa, where most had been captured. The Geneva Convention required similar climates for prisoner housing. Camp Hearn in Texas was among the first camps to receive Afrika Korps prisoners. Construction had been completed in just 4 months, using American industrial efficiency. The facility could accommodate 4,800 POWs in relative comfort. The camp featured amenities that exceeded what most German soldiers had known as civilians before the war. Electric lights illuminated every barracks and work area. Hot water flowed from taps in washrooms. Flush toilets eliminated sanitation problems. Recreation halls provided space for entertainment and education. Mess halls served 3 hot meals daily to thousands of prisoners simultaneously. The scale of the operation impressed German officers who understood military logistics. The first full day's menu at Camp Hearn was preserved in official camp records. June 5, 1943, would be remembered by every prisoner who experienced it. The meals that day contained more nutrition than German civilians received in a week. Breakfast began with oatmeal swimming in fresh milk and sweetened with real sugar. Scrambled eggs were prepared with butter and served hot. Strips of bacon provided protein and fat that had vanished from German diets years earlier. Toast was made from white wheat bread and served with butter and fruit jam. Coffee was real Brazilian coffee served with cream and sugar. Orange juice provided vitamin C that would cure scurvy within days of consumption. Lunch featured vegetable soup made with fresh ingredients and real meat stock. Roast pork was served with brown gravy and accompanied by mashed potatoes. Fresh carrots provided color and nutrition. Bread and butter were available without limits. Apple pie for dessert contained real apples, sugar, butter, and wheat flour. Fresh milk accompanied every meal. The dairy richness helped rebuild bones weakened by calcium deficiency. German prisoners had not tasted fresh milk in years. Dinner brought fried chicken prepared with real oil and seasoning. Rice served as a side dish along with green beans cooked with bacon. Cornbread provided carbohydrates and was served warm with butter. Fruit salad offered vitamins and natural sugars. Coffee concluded every meal with cream and sugar available freely. This single day's menu contained approximately 3,500 calories of high-quality nutrition. German civilians were lucky to receive 1,700 calories daily of inferior food. The meat portions alone exceeded monthly German meat rations. Obergefreiter Hermann Richter had worked in a factory before the war. His family in the Ruhr had slowly starved as rations diminished year by year. "I ate until I was physically sick," he wrote to describe that first day. "Then I forced myself to eat more." We all did the same thing. Some men concealed bread in their bunks, certain this bounty would end tomorrow morning. The American guards laughed at our hoarding behavior. They told us there would be the same meals tomorrow and every day after. We couldn't believe them. How could this abundance continue indefinitely during wartime? The abundance of food in American POW camps accomplished what no propaganda campaign could have achieved. It destroyed Nazi ideology through the simple power of undeniable reality. These soldiers had been told America was weak and divided and collapsing under war pressure. Yet here they sat, as enemy prisoners being fed better than Wehrmacht officers in Berlin. America was simultaneously fighting a global two-front war. It was feeding millions of soldiers worldwide. It was supplying allies with massive food shipments, and it still had enough abundance to overfeed enemy prisoners. The camp canteen provided another window into American consumer culture that German prisoners had never imagined possible. With their daily wages of 80 cents from labor, they could purchase items that had vanished from Germany years earlier. Chocolate bars were available in multiple varieties. Cigarettes could be bought by the pack or carton. Razor blades, soap, toothpaste, and shaving cream filled the shelves. Writing paper and envelopes allowed communication with families back home. Most incredibly, ice cream was sold daily during warmer months. The canteen at Camp Herne sold 5,000 ice cream bars weekly to German prisoners who had not tasted ice cream since before the war began in 1939. Gefreiter Fritz Müller struggled to explain this luxury to his wife back in Germany. "Yesterday I bought ice cream," he wrote, in careful handwriting. Ice cream. In Germany, even Nazi Party officials cannot obtain ice cream anymore. But here, enemy prisoners purchase it for 5 American cents. The Americans have so much cocoa and sugar, they feed desserts to their enemies. What kind of nation possesses such wealth during total war? The therapeutic feeding program for malnourished prisoners revealed American medical abundance that German doctors could barely comprehend. Prisoners received vitamin injections to rapidly correct deficiency diseases that had plagued them for months. Nutritional supplements came in bottles containing hundreds of pills. Specialized diets addressed specific medical conditions caused by starvation. The camp hospitals maintained larger medical supplies than most German field hospitals during active combat. Penicillin was the miracle drug that Germany could not produce in sufficient quantities. American doctors used it freely to treat prisoner infections that would have been fatal without antibiotics. German medical officers watched in amazement. Dr. Heinrich Schmidt had served as a Wehrmacht medical officer before capture. His observations of American medical abundance filled multiple letters home. "They gave us vitamins in bottles like candy," he wrote in wonder. "Hundreds of pills to treat diseases we cannot cure in Germany. We had no vitamins available for our own wounded soldiers. Here, enemy prisoners receive better medical care than German civilians can dream of obtaining." By October 1943, labor shortages led to POWs working on American farms and in food processing facilities. This exposure to American agricultural and industrial food production completed their ideological transformation through undeniable evidence. At a cotton gin outside Houston, prisoners witnessed mechanical harvesting that seemed to defy physical laws. A single cotton-picking machine accomplished the work of 50 men laboring by hand. The gin processed more cotton daily than German textile mills saw in an entire month. The casual abundance of field workers shocked them more than the machinery. African-American laborers whom Nazi ideology had declared racially inferior ate lunches that would have been celebrations in Germany. Thick sandwiches of beef or ham filled with vegetables. Whole apples were consumed as snacks. Slices of pie accompanied their meals. Thermos bottles contained coffee with real cream. They threw away half-eaten food without any consideration of its value. Unteroffizier Johann Kellner worked on a farm near Jackson, Mississippi, and documented what he witnessed daily. "The Negro workers eat meat every single day," he wrote with disbelief. "White bread and fresh fruit are normal parts of their meals." One man threw away a whole apple, because it had a small brown bruise on the skin. In Germany, desperate people would fight over that damaged apple. Children would treasure it like gold. At a Del Monte processing plant in California, prisoners observed trainloads of peaches being converted into canned fruit, using technology that did not exist anywhere in Germany. The plant processed more fruit in a single day than Germany imported in an entire year. Workers drank orange juice like water throughout their shifts. Damaged fruit that would have been precious in Germany was discarded by the ton. Quality standards rejected produce that German families would have considered perfect. Nothing shocked German POWs more completely than American meat consumption patterns. In Germany, civilians received 250 grams of meat weekly, when ration cards could be filled. German soldiers were supposed to receive 150 grams daily, but rarely received that amount. In American POW camps, prisoners were served meat 2 or 3 times every single day. The quality astounded them even more than the sheer quantity. Not horse meat or mysterious canned substances labeled as meat. Real recognizable cuts of beef, pork, and chicken. Camp Shelby in Mississippi housed 5,300 German POWs at its peak capacity. The facility consumed 14,000 pounds of meat weekly to feed the prisoners. The camp butcher shop cut steaks, ground hamburger, and prepared roasts with casual efficiency. Obergefreiter Paul Fischer wrote home about a Sunday dinner that redefined his understanding of abundance. "Today, we had roast beef for Sunday dinner," he began. "A slab of meat as thick as my thumb was placed on my plate. The American guards complained the meat was tough and overcooked. In Germany, this would be wedding feast meat reserved for the most special occasions. My children have never seen such meat in their entire lives." Prisoners working at Swift & Company's meatpacking plant in Fort Worth witnessed the full industrial scale of American meat production. The facility processed 5,000 cattle daily using assembly line methods that German industry could not match. Workers carried home packages of beef that would have cost a German laborer an entire month's wages. "The waste was magnificent," wrote Hauptmann Kurt Zimmermann. "They discarded meat for having too much fat that would have been treasured in Germany." One plant produced more meat in a single week than Bavaria processed in an entire year. The scale of American food production was beyond German comprehension, even for industrial engineers among the prisoners. German POWs had subsisted for years on preserved vegetables that barely qualified as food. Sauerkraut, pickled beets, and dried legumes formed the basis of their vegetable intake. Fresh fruit had become a distant memory available only to Nazi Party elite. In American camps, fresh produce arrived daily by refrigerated trucks. The psychological impact of fresh oranges served at breakfast cannot be overstated for men who had not tasted citrus in years. Tropical fruit in June in Texas made available to enemy prisoners. Regular shipments brought apples, peaches, pears, grapes, and even bananas to the camps. Fruit that most Germans had not seen since before the war began, in September 1939. The vitamin content rapidly cured deficiency diseases. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Becker wrote home about the medical miracle of fresh fruit. "They gave us oranges at breakfast," he began, "not for special occasions, but every single day if we wanted them. The vitamin C cured my bleeding gums within 1 week of eating fresh fruit. We consumed more fruit as enemy prisoners than German children see in an entire year of wartime rationing." The vegetable variety seemed endless to men accustomed to turnips and cabbage. Lettuce, tomatoes, corn, beans, peas, carrots, potatoes, onions, squash, all fresh rather than preserved in brine or dried to leather consistency. Camp Hearn maintained a 50-acre vegetable garden worked by prisoners who marveled at American soil productivity and farming methods. Irrigation systems provided water on demand. Chemical fertilizers boosted yields beyond German imagination. Working on American farms, prisoners encountered agricultural abundance that challenged everything they thought possible. In California's Central Valley, where some POWs were transferred for agricultural work, they picked fruit in orchards stretching beyond the horizon. They watched in horror as perfectly edible fruit was discarded for minor cosmetic blemishes. Tons of food were destroyed to maintain market prices. In Germany, such waste would have been considered criminal sabotage of the war effort. Chocolate had completely disappeared from Germany by 1941. It was replaced by ersatz chocolate, made from roasted acorns and beet sugar that bore no resemblance to real cocoa. Actual chocolate became rarer than gold or diamonds. Sugar was rationed to 200 grams monthly for German civilians when available. Most families received far less than their allocated rations. Beet sugar was reserved for industrial uses and military rations. In American POW camps, chocolate and sweets were everyday items available for purchase, with pocket money earned from labor. The Camp Post Exchange sold Hershey bars, Baby Ruth, Snickers, and Milky Way candy bars that would become legendary among returned POWs. The psychological impact of casual availability of luxury foods destroyed German morale more effectively than military defeats. Obergefreiter Kurt Wagner wrote home in amazement about the camp canteen's abundance. "I bought 5 chocolate bars with 1 day's wages from farm work," he reported. In Germany, all the money in the world cannot purchase 1 real chocolate bar. What kind of wealth allows enemies to buy chocolate daily? Camp kitchens baked desserts daily as routine parts of meal preparation. Pies, cakes, cookies, and puddings appeared regularly on camp menus. Sugar was used liberally in coffee, on cereal, and in dessert recipes. The prisoners, many suffering from years of sugar deprivation, initially made themselves sick consuming sweets. Their bodies could not process the sudden influx of refined sugar and complex carbohydrates they had been denied. Milk, butter, cheese, and cream represented dairy products that had virtually disappeared from German civilian diets by 1943. Fresh milk was reserved for small children and pregnant women when any was available at all. Butter had become a black market commodity worth more than gold per gram. Cheese existed only as a memory of pre-war abundance. Most Germans had not tasted fresh dairy products in years. At Camp Herne, the local dairy delivered 500 gallons of fresh milk daily to feed the prisoners. Milk appeared at every meal without restriction. Prisoners who had not tasted fresh milk in years drank it like medicine for their weakened bodies. Unteroffizier Franz Weber wrote emotionally about this simple luxury that meant everything to him. "I drank a full glass of cold milk today," he began. "Real milk, not powdered, not condensed, not mixed with water or chalk dust. It tasted like peace itself, like childhood memories before the war destroyed everything normal, like everything we had lost when Hitler promised us victory and gave us starvation instead." German coffee by 1943 consisted of roasted barley, ground acorns, or chicory root. These bitter substitutes bore no resemblance to actual coffee beans. The smell and taste were completely different from pre-war coffee. In American POW camps, real Brazilian coffee flowed like water from morning until evening. The psychological impact of unlimited coffee cannot be overstated for a culture that had prized coffee as central to social interaction and daily routine. The smell of brewing coffee in the morning awakened pleasant memories of pre-war normalcy. Casual refills at every meal demonstrated American abundance. The ability to drink coffee with real cream and sugar delivered devastating blows to Nazi propaganda about American poverty. Hauptmann Friedrich Zimmermann documented the coffee abundance in letters home. "The Americans drink coffee constantly throughout the day," he wrote. "Real coffee from Brazil, prepared with cream and sugar without any restrictions. In Germany, my mother stretches 50 grams of ersatz coffee substitute to last an entire month. Here, enemy prisoners drink real coffee whenever they desire it." Bread represented the fundamental staple of German diet and the foundation of survival during wartime rationing. German bread by 1943 had become a dark, heavy mixture of rye flour, potato starch, and sawdust filler. Citizens were rationed 2,000 grams of bread weekly for manual laborers. Office workers received less. The bread often arrived moldy or filled with weevils. Families fought over every crumb because bread meant life or death. In American POW camps, fresh white bread appeared at every meal without restriction. The camp bakery at Camp Shelby produced 1,000 loaves weekly using white wheat flour that Germans associated with wealth and luxury. Prisoners could consume as many slices as they wanted. The bread was soft, fresh, and made from pure wheat flour without adulterants or substitutes. Toast appeared at breakfast with butter and jam. Gefreiter Paul Schmidt wrote home about this abundance that seemed criminal during wartime. "White bread soft as cake appears fresh every day," he reported. "We can take as many slices as we want, without any restrictions whatsoever." In Germany, people are killed for stealing bread from their neighbors. Here, enemy prisoners eat white bread like it grows on trees outside the camp gates. As prisoners were permitted to write letters home, their correspondence became vehicles of devastating truth that German censors struggled to suppress. How could they explain to families surviving on turnip soup that enemy prisoners ate meat 3 times daily? Many prisoners initially lied in their letters home. They could not bear to burden starving families with the truth about American abundance. Others sent their entire monthly earnings home to purchase food on the black market. Their wages from American farm labor could buy what German ration cards could not obtain. A month's prisoner wages could feed a German family for 6 months, if black market food could be found. Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann's letter to his wife was intercepted by German censors and preserved in security files. "My beloved Greta," he began, "I am well fed here. Do not worry about my health or nutrition." The Americans have more food than they know what to do with. I understand now why they fight so hard. They are protecting paradise while we were told they were starving. What stunned German POWs more than sheer abundance was American flexibility in accommodating individual dietary needs and preferences. Prisoners with medical conditions received specially prepared meals tailored to their health requirements. Diabetics received sugar-free meals prepared separately. Those suffering from ulcers were given bland diets that would not irritate their digestive systems. This individualized medical care for enemy prisoners exceeded what German hospitals could provide for their own wounded soldiers. The Americans even attempted to provide culturally familiar foods when possible. They procured rye flour to make dark bread more familiar to German tastes. Sauerkraut and other German preferences were added to camp menus when supplies allowed. This respect for individual dietary needs and cultural preferences contradicted everything the prisoners had been taught about American individualism versus German collective strength. The enemy was treating them better than their own government ever had. Dr. Wilhelm Braun served as senior German medical officer at Camp Shelby and documented American medical care in official reports. The Americans spend more effort accommodating the dietary needs of enemy prisoners than the Wehrmacht spends feeding its own soldiers, he concluded. As increasing numbers of prisoners worked on American farms, They received comprehensive education in agricultural productivity that would reshape post-war Germany. They learned about crop rotation, chemical fertilizers, mechanized farming equipment, and irrigation systems. They witnessed yields per acre that German agriculture could not achieve even during peacetime with unlimited resources. Scientific farming methods produced abundance that seemed magical to men from a nation where agricultural productivity had declined every year since 1939. Working on a wheat farm in Kansas, Obergefreiter Hermann Weber discovered that a single American farmer using machinery could cultivate 640 acres of farmland. This amount of land would require an entire German village working together to farm by traditional methods. The combine harvester could process 100 acres of wheat in a single day. The machine did work that would take hundreds of German farmers weeks to complete by hand. The efficiency was beyond German comprehension. The American farmer I worked for produced more food than my entire district in Bavaria, Weber wrote home. He accomplished this with machines, chemicals, and scientific methods we had never seen or imagined possible. November 25, 1943, brought another devastating psychological shock in the form of Thanksgiving dinner. The German prisoners had no cultural context for this American holiday. They did not understand the historical significance or traditions involved. But they understood abundance when it was placed before them on their plates. The meal served at Camp Hearn, that Thanksgiving Day would be remembered by every prisoner who experienced it. The portions were beyond their comprehension. Roast turkey with bread stuffing filled their plates. Mashed potatoes swimming in brown gravy accompanied the meat. Sweet potatoes were topped with marshmallows they had never seen before. Green bean casserole provided vegetables. Cranberry sauce offered tart sweetness that complemented the rich meats. Fresh rolls were served with real butter for spreading. Pumpkin pie and apple pie provided desserts made with real sugar, flour, and spices. Coffee and fresh milk concluded the feast. Each prisoner received portions that would have fed an entire German family for a full week. The turkey alone exceeded monthly German meat rations for an entire household. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote home about this incomprehensible celebration. The Americans celebrated a holiday by feeding enemy prisoners like European nobility, he reported. If every American family was eating the same meal, America is not a country, but a paradise on earth. Prisoners working in American canning factories witnessed food preservation on an industrial scale that Germany could not begin to match. At the Campbell Soup Factory in Camden, New Jersey, they watched assembly lines produce 10 million cans of soup annually. The production lines ran continuously 24 hours per day. Machines filled cans with meat and vegetables that German factories could not obtain during wartime rationing. The automation astounded German engineers among the prisoners. Automated peeling machines processed vegetables faster than armies of workers could accomplish by hand. Continuous cooking systems maintained precise temperatures. Vacuum sealers created airtight containers that would preserve food for years. Most shocking was the quality control that rejected perfectly good food for minor cosmetic defects. Cans with slightly dented surfaces were discarded. Labels printed with minor color variations caused entire batches to be rejected. The waste stream from quality control exceeded Germany's total food production for entire regions. Perfectly nutritious food was destroyed because it did not meet American cosmetic standards for retail sales. Unteroffizier Fritz Müller documented this waste that seemed criminal during wartime. They rejected whole pallets of canned goods because labels were printed slightly off-center, he wrote in disbelief. Perfect food discarded for cosmetic flaws, while German children starve. Ice cream emerged as the ultimate symbol of American excess that German prisoners could not reconcile with their understanding of wartime sacrifice. In Germany, ice cream had been a rare luxury before the war. During wartime, it became completely impossible to obtain. In American POW camps, ice cream was routine daily fare during summer months. Camp Shelby operated an ice cream machine that produced 50 gallons daily when weather was warm. The machine ran constantly to meet demand from prisoners and guards alike. Prisoners could purchase ice cream bars, cones, and cups at the camp canteen using money earned from labor assignments. The idea that enemies were consuming ice cream while German children had never tasted it proved emotionally devastating. Obergefreiter Hans Meyer wrote home about this luxury that symbolized everything wrong with their understanding of the war. "I ate chocolate ice cream today," he reported. In Germany, this would be unimaginable even for wealthy families before the war. Here, prisoners of war purchase ice cream for pocket change earned working on American farms. What kind of nation feeds desserts to its enemies while fighting for its survival? The transformation in prisoners' health through proper nutrition was documented meticulously by American medical officers who monitored their recovery from starvation diseases. Within 3 months of arrival, the average German prisoner gained 25 to 30 pounds of healthy weight. Scurvy disappeared completely within weeks of consuming fresh fruits and vegetables. Night blindness resolved as vitamin A deficiency was corrected through dairy products and fresh produce. Protein edema subsided as high-quality meat rebuilt muscle tissue. Major Robert Harrison served as chief medical officer at Camp Shelby and filed regular reports on prisoner health improvements. The Germans arrived resembling concentration camp victims rather than enemy soldiers, he documented. They were emaciated, diseased, and mentally affected by prolonged starvation. Within 90 days of proper nutrition, they had been transformed into healthy men who could work productively and think clearly about their future. 3 solid months of real food worked miracles on their bodies. The changes amazed even the prisoners themselves. Skin color returned from gray to pink. Hollow cheeks filled out. Sunken eyes brightened with life again. Arms that had been sticks developed muscle. Legs grew strong enough to work full days. Mental fog from starvation cleared like morning mist. Their minds sharpened. Concentration returned. They caught glimpses of themselves in mirrors and windows. The faces looking back were the men they had been before war consumed everything. Strong, healthy, alive. But as their bodies healed, their hearts broke. Every full meal brought crushing waves of guilt. How could they sit down to 3 squares while their families gnawed on turnip peels? How could they enjoy seconds when their children counted potato skins as treasure? The bitter truth ate at them. America fed enemy prisoners better than Germany fed its own loyal citizens. This reality was too painful to share in letters home. Too devastating to put into words that censors might read. One hidden letter discovered years later told the whole story. The writer poured out his shame in words never meant to be seen. "My beloved wife, I cannot speak the truth to you. Every day I eat meat, while you starve on scraps. Every night I sleep warm while bombs fall on your head. These Americans treat me with more kindness than our own leaders showed you." Christmas, 1943, delivered another crushing blow to whatever faith remained. American churches organized massive gift campaigns. Civic groups collected donations. The Red Cross coordinated shipments. Together, they sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners. Each box contained treasures beyond imagination. Real chocolate that melted on tongues that had forgotten sweetness. cookies baked by American grandmothers, canned fruits that burst with flavor, cigarettes and soap and small luxuries that had vanished from German life. Local communities added personal touches that broke hearts. Hand-knitted scarves made by church ladies who had sons fighting in Europe, Christmas cards drawn by children whose fathers might die fighting Germans, homemade cookies wrapped in tissue paper by women who could have been war widows. The packages went to every prisoner regardless of rank. Generals and privates received identical gifts. This democratic generosity from people whose families were dying in European battles shattered the last pieces of racial theory propaganda. One prisoner wrote in his secret diary about the impossible contradiction. American civilians, whose sons we tried to murder just months ago, sent us Christmas presents. Churches held special services praying for our welfare. Small children colored pictures, wishing us Merry Christmas and happy times with our families. Only a people absolutely certain of victory could show such kindness to enemies. Only a nation drowning in abundance could afford such generosity. By early 1944, prison camp meals had become unexpected schools of nutrition science. The Germans learned concepts completely foreign to their experience. They discovered vitamins. They studied balanced diets. They observed food safety practices unknown in wartime Germany. Camp libraries stocked American agricultural journals and cookbooks. Prisoners spent evening hours reading about scientific farming methods. They studied mechanized agriculture. They learned about food processing and preservation techniques. They discovered that American abundance wasn't accidental luck. It came from scientific breeding of crops, from chemical fertilizers and soil testing, from mechanical harvesters and efficient distribution systems. One former agricultural student wrote detailed notes about what he observed. The Americans have transformed farming into pure science. They test every handful of soil for nutrients. They breed plants like we breed horses for specific traits. They spray chemicals that multiply crop yields beyond belief. No wonder they have more food than they can possibly eat. As 1944 wore on and news from Germany grew darker, the contrast became unbearable. Letters that slipped past military censors painted pictures of hell. Cities reduced to smoking ruins. Civilians boiling grass into soup. Children dying from malnutrition while their fathers fought overseas. Meanwhile, German prisoners of war in America wrote complaints about boring menus, about too much beef and not enough pork, about coffee that could have been stronger, about desserts that repeated too often. The moral foundation of everything they had believed crumbled like stale bread. How could the master race be starving while their supposedly inferior enemies threw food away? How could German children eat grass soup while American prisoners complained about repetitive meals? Even the black workers who collected their garbage ate better than German officers had eaten in peacetime. The ideology was dead. Reality had killed it with kindness. Summer 1944 brought the prisoners face to face with American agriculture at its peak growing season. They picked peaches in Georgia orchards that stretched beyond horizons. They harvested vegetables in New Jersey fields that produced more food in single days than German farms produced all season. They worked wheat harvests in Kansas that covered landscapes like golden oceans. The sheer volume of production overwhelmed minds accustomed to scarcity. At one Georgia peach orchard, prisoners picked fruit in single shifts that could have supplied entire German cities for weeks. Perfect peaches got sorted by size and quality for shipping to markets. Slightly imperfect fruit went to canneries for processing. Damaged peaches were tossed aside for pig feed or compost. One prisoner wrote in disbelief about the casual waste he witnessed. "We fed thousands of perfect peaches to pigs today. Fruit too ripe for shipping went straight to swine." In Germany, grown men would weep to see such peaches given to animals instead of hungry children. An incident at Camp Shelby in July 1944 captured the psychological impact better than any official report. Local farmers donated truckloads of watermelons for 4th of July celebrations. Most German prisoners had never seen watermelons before. This exotic fruit simply didn't exist in Germany. The prisoners received whole melons to share among themselves. Many stared in confusion at the striped green spheres. They had no idea how to eat them. Some wept openly when they tasted the sweet red flesh. Pure sugar and water in fruit form. Each melon contained more sweetness than German children had tasted all year. One prisoner wrote about the overwhelming experience. "They gave us giant green fruits filled with sweet red flesh, like nothing we had ever imagined. Each one could have fed an entire family for days. The Americans ate the sweet centers and threw away everything else. Any nation that can waste food for entertainment has already won this war." Working Iowa cornfields provided another agricultural shock that defied German understanding. Iowa alone produced more corn than all of Germany grew of every grain combined. But the most shocking discovery was that most corn went to feed animals, not humans. The concept seemed impossible. Growing food to feed to animals to produce meat represented luxury beyond German comprehension. In America, prime farmland was dedicated to producing animal feed. This demonstrated agricultural abundance that seemed like fantasy. One prisoner tried to explain the incomprehensible system to his diary. The farmer explained that corn mainly feeds pigs and cattle. They grow mountains of grain just to convert it into meat. The Americans have so much food, they can afford this incredible inefficiency. At a Colorado sugar beet processing plant, German prisoners witnessed sugar production that shattered their sense of reality. Germany suffered severe sugar shortages. Civilians received tiny monthly rations of 200 grams when available. The Colorado plant processed 5,000 tons of sugar beets every single day. Mountains of white sugar poured from processing machines. Workers received 5-pound bags of sugar as partial payment for their labor. These workers used sugar with casual abandon that seemed criminal to German eyes. Half cups stirred into coffee. Generous portions sprinkled on cereal. Liberal amounts in home baking. The casual consumption of pure sugar by ordinary American workers provided devastating comparison to German reality. One prisoner recorded his shock in careful detail. "I watched a plant worker pour half a cup of sugar into his coffee cup. This represented 2 full months of German sugar rations dissolved into one single cup of coffee." German prisoners working Gulf Coast ports witnessed American fishing fleets that dwarfed anything they had imagined. Shrimp boats returned with catches that exceeded German fishing industry output for entire weeks. Most shocking was the casual waste. Tons of bycatch, perfectly edible fish got thrown back into the sea because they weren't the target species. At Galveston, prisoners watched shrimpers discard more fish in single afternoons than German fleets caught in months. The concept of throwing away food because it wasn't the preferred type seemed like madness to men from a starving nation. One prisoner wrote about the incomprehensible waste. They threw tons of perfectly good fish back into the ocean because they were catching shrimp, not fish. In Germany, people would fight wars over fish heads and bones. Wisconsin dairy farms introduced German prisoners to milk production that seemed impossible. Individual farms produced more milk in single days than entire German districts produced in weeks. The technology overwhelmed them. mechanical milkers that never tired, refrigerated tanks that kept milk fresh, pasteurization equipment decades ahead of German farming, quality control that rejected anything less than perfect. Most shocking was the casual waste of liquid gold. Milk that wasn't perfectly fresh got poured out on fields. Cream got separated and used liberally in cooking. Butter got churned in quantities that could have supplied German cities. One prisoner recorded the impossible abundance he witnessed daily. "The farm where I work produces 1,000 gallons of milk every single day. Just one farm. When milk gets slightly old, they pour it on fields as fertilizer. They waste more milk in one day than my village saw all year." Maryland egg farms introduced prisoners to industrial production unknown in German agriculture. Single farms housed 50,000 chickens, producing 40,000 eggs daily. Automated systems collected, washed, and sorted eggs with mechanical efficiency. German civilians received one precious egg weekly on ration cards when supplies allowed. American prisoners of war ate eggs every morning at breakfast as standard fare. The Maryland farm shipped entire train cars loaded with eggs to distant cities. One prisoner tried to comprehend the scale of production. "Each chicken house holds more birds than our entire village owned. They throw away more cracked eggs every day than Germany produces in good weeks." Thanksgiving 1944 proved even more abundant than the previous year, despite America fighting massive wars on two continents simultaneously. The feast served to German prisoners demonstrated that American abundance had grown rather than diminished under wartime pressure. Turkey and ham and roast beef covered tables. Mashed potatoes and sweet potatoes and stuffing filled every space. Gravy and green beans and corn crowded together. Cranberry sauce and 3 different pies and ice cream completed meals fit for kings. The prisoners sat in stunned silence facing this impossible abundance. Their homeland was starving. Their cities lay in ruins. Their children ate grass soup when they could find grass. Yet America fed German enemy prisoners feasts that exceeded peacetime German celebrations. One prisoner wrote about the crushing psychological impact. "The Americans have so much food, they can feed their enemies better than we fed ourselves during peace. They have conquered us with abundance before their armies even arrived." By late 1944, many prisoners stopped writing home about food entirely. The guilt had become unbearable, the contrast too painful to describe. Hidden diaries and unsent letters discovered after the war revealed the psychological torture of abundance amid family starvation. One never-mailed letter contained words of pure anguish. "I dream every night that I could send you one single American meal. The meat from my lunch today could feed you for an entire week. I am living in paradise while you suffer in hell. How can I enjoy ice cream while my children drink water soup?" As 1945 began and reports of German military collapse reached the camps, the contrast became surreal beyond description. Prisoners learned about the failed Ardennes offensive while eating elaborate New Year dinners. They heard radio reports about German cities without food, heat, or clean water, while sitting in heated mess halls eating hot meals. American newspapers showed photographs of starving German civilians, children with rickets and swollen starvation bellies. The prisoners recognized their own families in these heartbreaking images. One wrote about the unbearable irony. "The newspaper shows German children eating soup made from grass and tree bark. I had bacon and eggs for breakfast this morning. My little daughter is eating grass while I eat meat that gets thrown away here." When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, German prisoners in American camps faced terrible irony. The war's end meant they would eventually return to a destroyed and starving homeland. Many didn't want to leave the camps. The American prison system had become refuge from the starvation awaiting them at home. U.S. military officials began programs to train prisoners in food production and preservation techniques they could use to help rebuild Germany. Prisoners learned canning methods. They studied improved farming techniques. They learned about nutrition and food distribution systems. They practiced skills they could teach hungry civilians. Major General Louis Hershey, overseeing prisoner operations, explained the program's purpose. These men have witnessed American agricultural abundance. They understand what's possible with proper methods. They'll return to Germany with knowledge that can help prevent mass starvation. As repatriation approached in late 1945 and early 1946, German prisoners faced cruel irony. They had to prepare to leave abundance for starvation. Camp commanders instituted programs to gradually reduce rations. The goal was helping prisoners readjust their bodies to scarcity. Men who had eaten 4,000 calories daily needed preparation for survival on starvation rations. Prisoners learned to forage for edible plants. They practiced making soup from minimal ingredients. They studied food preservation without refrigeration. The same camps that had demonstrated impossible abundance now taught survival skills for scarcity. The senior German medical officer wrote grimly about the transition. "We must teach our men to starve again." Their stomachs have expanded on American abundance. Returning suddenly to German rations could kill some of them from shock. Before repatriation began, each camp held farewell celebrations. Americans provided final feasts that exceeded even holiday meals in their generosity. At Camp Shelby's farewell dinner in February 1946, the menu included luxuries that seemed like fantasy: shrimp cocktail and prime rib and lobster tail, baked potatoes with butter and sour cream, fresh asparagus and Caesar salad, chocolate cake and ice cream, and wine and coffee. Men wept openly during these farewell feasts, not from joy at going home, but from terrible knowledge that they might never eat like this again. One prisoner wrote about the emotional devastation. "Our last American meal was finer than any German celebration I remember from peacetime. Tomorrow we return to turnip soup and sawdust bread. America sends us home with full bellies and broken hearts." The journey home revealed the full scope of Germany's destruction. As repatriation trains crossed into German territory, prisoners pressed faces against windows watching landscapes of ruins. Civilians at train stations were skeletal figures begging for food the returning prisoners didn't possess. At Frankfurt Station, former prisoners watched German civilians fighting over garbage scraps from Allied military trains. Children with grotesquely swollen starvation bellies begged for chocolate that didn't exist anywhere. One prisoner wrote about the homecoming shock. "We returned to hell itself. My wife thought I was an imposter because I looked too healthy and well-fed. My son, born while I was captive, has rickets from malnutrition. The shame of my health among their starvation is unbearable." Despite the trauma of return, former prisoners became crucial to German recovery efforts. They brought invaluable knowledge of American agricultural methods. They understood food preservation and nutrition science. They knew that abundance was possible because they had lived it every day. Many former prisoners became leaders in German agricultural reform movements. They introduced mechanization techniques learned on American farms. They promoted chemical fertilizers and scientific farming methods. They understood that reconstruction was possible because they had witnessed a society that achieved it. One former prisoner became an agricultural advisor in Bavaria after the war. He wrote about applying lessons learned in captivity. "We learned in American fields what German schools never taught: that science and democracy create abundance, while ideology creates only hunger. When the Marshall Plan was announced in 1947, former prisoners understood its significance better than most Germans. They had experienced American generosity and witnessed American abundance firsthand. They knew America could afford to rebuild Europe because they had seen the casual waste that demonstrated unlimited resources. The food aid that began flowing into Germany seemed familiar to former prisoners. The same abundance they had experienced in captivity now extended to the entire German nation. One former prisoner wrote about the recognition. The Americans feed us again, this time as free men instead of prisoners. They send wheat and milk powder and canned goods. The same abundance we ate in camps now saves our nation. Studies conducted in the 1950s found that former prisoners who had been in American camps showed significantly different attitudes than those captured by other powers. They were more likely to support democratic government. They believed in economic cooperation with former enemies. They maintained positive views of America despite the war. The food experience had been permanently transformative. These men had tasted abundance and wanted it for Germany. They had seen prosperity and understood it came from production, not conquest, from scientific agriculture, not racial superiority. Dr. Hans Richter, studying former prisoners in 1955, reached striking conclusions. The American camps were inadvertent schools of democracy. Through full stomachs, prisoners learned what ideology had hidden, that democracy and capitalism could create abundance that fascism only promised. In the 1960s and 1970s, as former prisoners aged, many recorded detailed testimonies of their experiences. Their accounts consistently emphasized food as the most psychologically impactful aspect of captivity. One former officer testified about the transformation he experienced. The Americans defeated us with food before their armies arrived in Europe. Every meal was a lesson in their national power. We surrendered to abundance long before we surrendered to Eisenhower. Another former prisoner reflected on what abundance had taught him. I learned more about America from its food than from any books or propaganda. The casual waste taught me about surplus beyond imagination. The endless variety taught me about freedom of choice. In the 1980s, former German prisoners began returning to America for reunion gatherings. They visited camps where they had been held, now converted to other uses. They met with former guards and local civilians who remembered them working on farms and in factories. At a 1985 reunion at former Camp Shelby, a former prisoner brought German beer to share with American veterans. He offered a toast that brought tears to eyes on both sides. "You fed us when we were your enemies. You showed us abundance when we knew only scarcity." We returned to Germany with full bellies and new dreams for what was possible. The American Guard veteran responded with equal emotion. "We just fed you the same food we ate ourselves. Nothing special or extraordinary. That's what America represents. Nothing special that seems miraculous to those who have known real want." The numbers tell the complete story of American agricultural might versus German wartime scarcity. The contrast was devastating and absolute. German civilian rations from 1943 to 1945 painted a picture of starvation. Bread rations provided 2,000 grams weekly when available. Meat rations allowed 250 grams weekly if supplies existed. Fat rations permitted 100 grams weekly. Sugar rations allowed 200 grams monthly. No milk for adults. 1 egg weekly if available. Daily calories ranged from 1,200 to 1,700. German prisoner rations in American camps told a different story entirely. Bread was unlimited and fresh. Meat provided 350 grams daily minimum. Butter was available daily. Sugar was unlimited in coffee and desserts. Milk was provided by the quart daily. Eggs appeared daily at breakfast. Daily calories ranged from 3,500 to 4,000. The contrast was not merely quantitative but qualitative. German civilian rations consisted of ersatz substitutes, spoiled supplies, and sawdust fillers. American prisoner rations were fresh, varied, and higher quality than German peacetime standards. Post-war psychological studies found that German prisoners in American camps experienced complete cognitive reconstruction through consumption. The daily experience of abundance forced them to revise fundamental beliefs about American society, German superiority, and the nature of national strength. Dr. Friedrich Braun's 1950 study reached revolutionary conclusions. The prisoners underwent involuntary ideological conversion through ingestion rather than indoctrination. Every meal contradicted Nazi propaganda more effectively than any speech. The men were not brainwashed, but belly-washed, converted through consumption rather than coercion. The transformation was particularly profound because it was experiential rather than theoretical. The prisoners didn't read about American abundance in books. They ate it with their own mouths. They didn't hear lectures about agricultural might. They harvested it with their own hands. Former prisoners introduced American food culture to post-war Germany in countless ways. They brought recipes learned from mess hall cooks. They taught cooking techniques learned from farm wives. Most importantly, they carried the expectation that abundance was achievable rather than impossible. The first German supermarkets in the 1950s were modeled on American stores described by former prisoners. The concept of food choice, of aisles stocked with variety, of refrigerated sections and frozen foods, were all imports from American captivity experience. Even American fast food's eventual success in Germany was partly prepared by former prisoners who remembered hamburgers, hot dogs, and ice cream from captivity. They had tasted casual abundance and wanted it available for all Germans. At the last major reunion of German prisoners in 1995, the 50th anniversary of war's end, 89-year-old Otto Müller delivered the keynote address to a packed auditorium. We came to America as warriors of the master race, convinced of our superiority, certain of ultimate victory. We left as chastened men who had eaten from democracy's abundant table. The Americans fed us not from cruelty, showing us what we couldn't have, but from generosity, sharing what they possessed in overwhelming abundance. Every meal was a lesson in reality. Every full belly was an education in possibility. We learned that America's strength lay not in its armies, but in its agriculture. Not in its weapons, but in its wheat fields. Not in its ideology, but in its ice cream. Yes, ice cream. That impossible luxury that American prisoners ate daily, while German children starved for bread. We returned to Germany with knowledge more valuable than military secrets. We knew abundance was possible because we had consumed it. We knew democracy worked because we had digested its fruits. We knew peace was preferable to war because we had tasted both. To the Americans who fed us, you conquered us with kindness. You defeated us with donuts and coffee. You converted us with cream and butter. We who arrived as your enemies left as ambassadors of your abundance. The food you shared when we were prisoners became the foundation of friendship as allies. Thank you for feeding us when we were hungry, for showing mercy when we deserved judgment, for teaching us that strength lies not in taking, but in giving freely. We ate democracy, and it transformed us completely. The audience, American veterans and German veterans and their families, stood in thunderous ovation. They were united by memories of when enemies became friends over food, when hatred dissolved in hospitality, when war ended not with vengeance, but with vitamins and kindness. The story of German prisoners and American food abundance stands as one of history's most remarkable examples of unintentional psychological warfare. Without planning or propaganda, America conquered its enemies through the simple act of feeding them well and treating them with dignity. The 425,000 German prisoners who passed through American camps, with 371,683 present at peak capacity, experienced collective transformation through consumption. They arrived as Nazi warriors and left as witnesses to democratic abundance. They came believing in German superiority and departed knowing American prosperity. They entered as enemies and exited as future allies. The food served in American prison camps did more than sustain life. It changed minds and hearts. Every generous portion undermined Nazi ideology. Every dessert demolished propaganda. Every glass of milk murdered myths of American weakness. The prisoners were defeated not by deprivation, but by abundance. Not by cruelty, but by kindness beyond comprehension. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not the atomic bomb, but the apple pie. Not the Sherman tank, but the Hershey bar. Not the B-17 bomber, but the beef steak. The German prisoners were conquered by consumption, defeated by dessert, vanquished by vegetables and kindness. They had expected to find a weak, divided nation on the verge of collapse. Instead, they discovered an agricultural colossus that could feed its enemies better than Germany could feed its own loyal people. They witnessed the arsenal of democracy, but more importantly, they tasted the abundance of democracy every single day. The transformation was complete and permanent. These men returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as converts to prosperity, as advocates for abundance, as missionaries of the possible. They had seen the future, and it was delicious. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in mess halls, not through destruction, but through generosity. Not by breaking bodies, but by filling bellies with good food and hope. The German prisoners, who couldn't believe they were eating meat and fruit and chocolate in American camps, learned that democracy's greatest strength was not its ability to destroy, but its capacity to create. Not its power to punish, but its ability to provide. Not its skill at war, but its genius for abundance. They arrived hungry and left full. Not just of food, but of new possibilities for what their nation could become. In their transformation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, the peaceful, prosperous Germany that would rise from rubble. The men who had marched for the Third Reich returned home as apostles of agriculture, prophets of prosperity, witnesses to the power of a society that could turn enemies into friends through the simple, revolutionary act of sharing its abundance without reservation. They had tasted America, and they would never be the same. They had eaten democracy and been transformed completely.